Scott Barker is an entrepreneur, sales leader, startup advisor, venture capitalist. He's co-founded GTMfund, which is an early stage VC firm where the limited partners are CROs and top go-to-market execs. And you've invested in breakout companies like Vanta, Owner, just to name a few. But before venture, you built your career in enterprise sales, helping companies like Outreach, and becoming one of the leading voices in modern go-to-market strategy. Yeah, so Scott, we're super pumped to have you on the show today, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, guys. Excited to be here and love what you two are doing with this podcast. As someone who's built a few podcasts, just keep going. That's part of the
Yeah,
game.
it's what it's about. I think this is episode 30 something now, so we're on our way. But yeah, Scott, as excited I am to ask you about your career, there's something I'm actually really excited to dive into first, and that's what you've been up to over the last little bit. You're coming to us live from India, and you're a few months into basically selling everything you own and traveling for an undetermined amount of time. And I'm curious, like, what made you do this in the first place, and what have you kind of learned over the last couple months?
Yeah, it's, that's a big question. I guess I'll start by sort of painting the picture for listeners and how I ended up in this little Airbnb in Rishikesh, India. I basically was running at full speed for about 15 years. Very early on, I actually dropped out of college to start my own business. I'm someone who likes to learn by doing instead of theory, um, and ended up selling that, not for a lot of money. Basically, recouped my time and the money we invested in it. I then got into tech. Started as at the very bottom as a SDR and kind of just outworked everyone and got promoted really fast. I got to lead and build teams. From there, I jumped over to run revenue at a media company called Sales Hacker. Ended up helping that media company get acquired by a software company called Outreach. Ended up becoming the youngest director in company history at Outreach, and they blew up. They went from about 20 mil ARR at the time of acquisition to 250 mil ARR when I left 4 years later. At roughly, I think at the peak, they were worth about $4.5 billion. And then ended up launching a fund with my partner Max, kind of off the side of my desk, while I still had a full-time exec role, which was insane. I do not recommend doing that. And then the fund started taking off. Went full-time on that. We raised 23 million USD
Well,
in our first fund, and then raised 54 million USD, so over 100 million Canadian. Um, Hired at the team, got the corner office with a view. We ended up buying back that media company, which is a funny story, but yeah, things were cooking, um, but things were moving really fast. My whole life I've joked about having something I call the sickness. And basically, that is something inside of me that is never satisfied. It is always restless. I will always push for the bigger goal, the bigger life. Um, and essentially, it's like a disease of more. And when you reach a certain level in your career, everyone around you also has that sickness. It's like almost a point of pride. People wear it as a badge of honor. And, I was so bought into this idea that I used to actually look for the sickness in the founders that I would invest in. And I thought that that was sort of a necessary prerequisite for success. This burning desire to achieve more that just never really goes away no matter what you do. And obviously, it's not all bad. It makes you very productive. You can do impossible things that others aren't willing to do. And it served me for a really long time. But I think it's telling that even before it was necessarily a bad thing in my life, I called it the sickness. I kind of knew it was a defect. It had negative consequences. And yeah, I guess what I found that this sickness, it's a progressive disease, meaning it's not going to just get better. It's actually only going to get worse. You're just going to want more. You're just going to find a new gear and just keep going. And over time, when your goals get bigger and bigger, the only way you can possibly achieve them is to sacrifice more and more of your life. And, maybe it starts by working on evenings, then it's on weekends. And then one day you realize you're actually never off. You're even on vacations, on Christmas, and then your relationships suffer because you're never in the present moment. And you're basically willing to even sacrifice your physical and your mental health in pursuit of whatever goal that you're trying to do. And, it got to the point over the last few years where every day felt like the most important day of my life. And when you're operating out of that framework, well, then you can justify every sacrifice. It's all worth it. My life was, on planes every week to go meet founders, hosting LP dinners and retreats, meeting new investors for dinner. And, the last 4.5 years are kind of a complete blur. It was kind of something you see in a movie. I was living the fast life, and it just kept getting faster. And, I'll pause in a second here, but I think when I look back at it and what got me to this point of, walking away from the fund, selling my house, selling my car, selling my fancy watches, all the bullshit that I acquired is, I got to that point by saying yes to opportunities. And so I never learned how to say no or to set boundaries. I was the partner who dropped everything and flew to LA to meet a big investor. I used to actually tell anyone I would talk to if they were thinking about investing, I'll fly to your city within 24 hours. You just let me know and I'll be there. And so, when we decided to go out and raise that much larger fund from 23 to 50, more than double, and it was decided that I would lead all of our fundraising efforts. And, if you get into VC, you will learn that by far the hardest part of VC, at least from an energy and a time perspective, is fundraising, especially when you're starting out and you're an unproven entity. And so I remember very clearly my partner looking at me when we were planning to do the 50 million. And he's like, can you get us there? And I didn't hesitate when I said, fuck yeah. It was in my head, it was already done. I knew the formula. You just work harder than anyone and you sacrifice whatever you have to do to get it done. And from that point on, every internal email that I sent to the team signed off with 50 million or die. Because that's genuinely how I felt. I was going to do this or I was going to die trying. And, that sounds dramatic, but that's where my head was at. And, upon reflection, it did kill me in a way, in a sense. I pushed myself so hard that kind of the old me died a little bit. So, long story short, I kind of found my edge, and I wasn't willing to realize that maybe I needed some help, maybe I needed some support, maybe I could, hire some people, get some things off my plate. And, I started off with a lot of really good habits, meditating, journaling, working out, going to yoga. And over time, things got so intense that I replaced all the good ones with the bad ones. I started drinking a lot more to cope. I couldn't sleep anymore. So, I was taking Xanax to sleep. Then if I was too exhausted to go through the 12 meetings I had that day, taking Adderall. And yeah, everything that made me was gone at one point. And that was sort of my breaking point. And it was, funnily enough, when we actually hit the goal. It wasn't like, oh, like we hit it, and then I was happy for maybe 12 hours, and immediately my brain was, what's next? And we started talking about what a $100 million fund would look like, and we're going to double it again. And it took me to some pretty dark places. I'm just like, what the fuck am I doing all this for?
Yeah.
So that's how you end up in India. It's a long-winded
Mhm.
way of doing it, and it's a beautiful journey. Like I learned a lot, and there's a lot of beauty through that. Um,
Yeah.
and I think there is a way to have that same level of intensity without burning yourself out. That wasn't my story.
So what I was actually just about to ask you is like I want to hear more about your travels over the last couple of months, but obviously the mindset you had while building all these things is ultimately what led you to this success. Um, and you said it yourself, like when you're looking
Hmm.
to invest in founders, you're looking for this same sort of sickness to like push to that goal and then the next goal and then the one after that. And so you kind of just answered this, but do you think you could have done this another way? And is there a way to balance both, you know, that ambition with also like, some healthiness to it?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, I think, and something I'm genuinely very curious about understanding. Certainly, some people seem to do it with more balance, and I think that's part of the thing I'm trying to get at my own podcast, where it's can you help people wake up before their wake up call? And I think it's possible. Um, like I think the pain and suffering is worth it if it eventually leads you to understand yourself and the world around you better. And it pushes you to that point where you finally see through this mirage that no money, no success is going to make you happy. And you realize that, what you're looking for is right in front of you. It's your family, it's people you love, it's the small moments. Um, and some people need to put their hand on the stove to see that it's hot, And I there's a really good quote. I can't remember who it is, but it's basically along the lines of, struggle is a teacher. So who am I to take away someone's teacher? People have to go through struggle. And ambition is not bad. Working hard is not bad. I think to do anything worthwhile, it requires some sacrifice and some pain. But just make sure the thing that you're suffering for, and maybe you don't even have to suffer, but that it's actually what you want. We can create these huge lives and sacrifice all this stuff. And you realize, oh, I actually don't even care if I drive like a really nice car. Like that's not meaningful for me. Or, I want a nice house, but it doesn't need to be this like ridiculous mansion. That's just what society or someone told me I wanted. Like, I actually don't care. Um, and so you make sure you're working towards the life you actually want to lead, that you want to lead, and the game that you pick, because these are all just games that you pick. It's like making the world a better place. It has some deeper meaning in it, and you're like passionate about it. And you can make money or be successful doing anything. So make sure it fills up your soul, um, and then it won't feel like suffering. Because suffering for money or to prove yourself to others is a very shitty trade. So don't make that trade.
Well said. Um, Something I was thinking about when you're kind of talking about that mindset shift and the discovery of what actually like matters to you, Scott. I was curious about when you were a kid, like how we open a lot of our episodes is we always ask our viewers how they were as a kid, what they were into, what they liked, and I'm wondering if um perhaps maybe you tapped into something that you think you had when you were younger that maybe you lost along the way. I'm curious to understand your upbringing. How did you grow up? And what sorts of principles did you have? What things did you believe in? What things did you care about? And maybe this
Mhm.
is something that, a discovery you just had later on in life, but I'm curious if there was some sort of reconnection to maybe something maybe you felt like you lost along the way.
Yeah, love that question, man. I actually have a a tattoo on my knee that says just a series of remembering. And what that means to me is life is kind of just about remembering the things we already knew as a kid. I think kids are kind of born with just knowing that life isn't all that serious, and it's about being curious, and it's about being playful, and it's about finding joy. And I was a really creative kid. I was a really curious kid, and very loving kid, very affectionate kid. And I don't know when it happened, but yeah, somewhere along the way, probably around as young as like 10, this infusion of wanting to be the best at everything I did kind of came in, and so I was a pretty good student, was put in, gifted classes, played a lot of sports, rugby, soccer, football, was the captain of my soccer team, won the BC Summer Games in rugby. I also acted, so I did a bunch of commercials when I was a kid, funny 90s brands, Hot Wheels, Cinnamon Toast Crunch, Ring Pop, which was pretty fun. But, a lot of the joy in that was kind of lost because I wanted to always get the part, have more things, blah, blah, blah. And then there was, I also wanted to be as popular as I could be. So in my friend group growing up, that meant, breaking rules, skipping class, being tough and partying really, really hard. So it was a bit of an anomaly trying to juggle all these sort of different characters in one body, trying to be a jock, trying to be good at school, but then also trying to be a badass and partying super hard. So I don't know. I look at that period as almost playing a bunch of different characters.
Got it.
You've always been what it seems a pretty entrepreneurial person. What was the moment when you were looking for something next? Like, did you know you wanted to start a business right off the gate? Did you want to go to school? Were you thinking about a corporate career? What did that kind of look like?
Yeah. I originally thought I was going to be a lawyer for a really long time. I think that's just Hollywood's portrayal of what a lawyer looked like. It looked fun to be in a suit and, make fun arguments. And people used to tell me, I think I was just very argumentative. So people used to tell me I'd make a good lawyer. So I was where I thought I was headed. But turns out, yeah, school wasn't really for me. And that's a tremendous amount of school. Um, but yeah, I guess like the entrepreneurial side was just sort of always there. Maybe I was naive, maybe I was overconfident. The idea of starting my own business just didn't seem like that big of a deal. It was like, well, you can get a job or you can start a business. And, I was, I guess, so simple in my thinking that it helped. It was just like, well, if I want to make money, then I find a problem. And if you solve that problem, better than other people can solve that problem, people will pay you for it. And so even in like grade 11, instead of getting, like a summer job, my buddy just got a brand new truck and we created like a junk removal business called Junk in the Trunk. And I still remember the flyers and made people laugh. And yeah, it just, I don't know. I guess I kind of like fell into it. And then, when I dropped out of college, I just looked for another problem that needed to be solved. And at that time, all of my friends in college and university hated doing laundry. So I was like, well, why don't I create a laundry subscription service where I pick all your dirty stuff up on Saturday and drop it off to you on Sunday at your doorstep with some Gatorade and snacks because you're probably going to be hungover from the night before. Like, you're going to
Genius.
want that. It was a pretty easy sale. Um, and that, now the operational side of that, when you scale and you have a shitload of laundry, not as fun. But the sales and marketing part was very fun.
That's awesome. Why didn't we have
Okay.
this in university,
We
James? I
could we
think we
could have been
needed this.
millionaires.
Not even I would have been a user.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah.
And then what's next? I guess you break into tech, you break into sales. You said you were pretty argumentative, thought you might have been a lawyer. I guess that kind of goes hand in hand with sales. Is that kind of what attracted you to sales?
I guess I kind of just fell into sales. So right out of high school, all my friends were like, working construction or working in a restaurant. and I just wanted to make more money. So it's just like I basically fell for like a door-to-door borderline scam that was like selling like kind of like Groupon's business model, but door to door. And they said you can make like $1,000 a day. Turns out I was like the only one in Canada that actually managed to make any sort of money like that. Um, and and then that took me. I did so well there that they were opening up an office in Sydney, Australia, and they flew me there, paid for my room and board, so I would train all the salespeople. I have no idea what I was doing, but I would just whatever I was doing was working, so I would just train them on um, all the things that I was sort of learning, how to interact with different people, and I would sketch out all these different kind of archetypes of people that they were going to meet and how to deal with them all. And so I just got a lot of at bats. Like I would knock on 150 doors a day, and such a wild time period to think back on. And you would literally like try and get them to give you your credit card like right there on the spot. So eventually, when I found my way into tech, I was like, this is the easiest shit I've ever done in my life. You mean all I have to do is get this person to like say yes to a Zoom meeting? Like, I got this. And I remember the very first day as a BDR, I beat my monthly record at a company called Payfirma, like my monthly quota in a day. It seemed easy after trying to get people's credit cards when you're knocking on the door, you know?
Selling over the phone and from a distance is certainly a lot easier than door to door. There's no one who can beat me up over the phone. It's at arm's length.
I relate to that too. I'm doing a startup, and I've done my fair share of cold calling, cold email, but the cold calling is definitely tough as well. Like when you do reach people and they don't want to talk to you, but it builds character. I think it's a good thing. It's obviously good to get rejection in many ways because you learn from that, and it just builds like strength. I think it's a good thing. Like if things just go your way, you probably don't fully develop your character in a way. And obviously, James, you do that every single day. So I think you have more character than me in that regard. And Scott, you probably have about 1,000 times more because you've done it for many, 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 many years. Um,
I
but
did
yeah,
it for a long time. And everything is sales, whether you're a business owner, an entrepreneur, or VC. 75% of VC is just sales. You just have a fancier title and you're a little more leveraged. But everything is sales. I mean, the work you're doing right now, James and Bryce, you're doing it cold calling and learning how to sell is like the greatest skill that you can have. You will use it for the rest of your life in just about every single environment. And I agree, Bryce, with what you said. I think is one of the things that scares me or makes me sad about us automating more and more of the SDR function is maybe we can do that, but what we're also doing, and maybe results will, get better or stay the same. And so why not? But like what we're doing is robbing people of the skills they get by doing that. And those skills are very, very important because you'll get rejected, 5,000 times and you got to keep going.
for sure. I think one thing James mentioned earlier in the podcast is about our target demographic, younger like students who are coming out of university, early career professionals. And I would say sales is a very popular role for obviously a lot of people, starting off their careers. So I'm curious for someone who is perhaps thinking about going into this line of work, what would you say to convince them that this is a great way to start their career and build these foundational skills that can help them, whether they go into different types of selling like venture capital later on, or starting their own venture, or any type of role really, even in their relationships or just life in general.
Yeah. You might as well learn it now because you're going to have to learn it at some point. And it's easier to learn it now, just like, don't you wish we all learned 5 languages when we were young and it was easy to pick things up? It just gets harder to learn things as you get older and you have, your brain is wired in a certain way. The higher up you go in your career, you really do realize that the people kind of at the top are selling for most of the day, whether that's a board meeting, whether you're a VP of engineering, but you have to sell your changes to the roadmap to, your CEO. Like you're always selling. And even if you're like, no, I'm a builder. Like if you can build and sell, uh, you know, you're a weapon. It's inevitable. You'll have to pick it up at some point. Do it now. Get someone to pay you to learn the skill. That's the way I looked at it. Like it's so incredible early on in your career. People are literally just giving you money to learn things that you need to make more money later in your career.
Yeah. And you end up switching into VC at some point. When did you realize that you wanted to go beyond selling or that you had already built all the skills necessary in selling, and wanted to eventually go into more of a investing slash strategic role?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I've always, as I mentioned earlier, just kind of been of the approach of, okay, let's go pick a hard game. Let's master that game. Once I've mastered that game, let's go play a harder game or a more interesting game, however you want to call it. And my old motto used to be, I just want to spend my life solving interesting problems with interesting people. Um, and, my ability to sell allowed me to do that. And so it seemed just sort of like a natural extension. Like I said, you're selling investors to give you money on your strategy and on yourself. You're selling founders to let you in their rounds. You're selling, selling, selling. So it's just a more leveraged way to use that skill set. And then, of course, when you're analyzing markets and you're meeting founders, a lot of the things that you learn in like discovery calls and, being able to tease out information and listen for what the question behind the question and what they're getting at, all of that is really helpful when you're trying to make a decision as well. And so, yeah, I think it was a natural kind of evolution from where I was at. Um, and yeah, I guess it took off quicker than we expected, but it was cool.
And when you were doing, all this selling, and I guess you, as James said, like venture investing kind of was another form of selling for you. What were some of the biggest lessons that you learned? Perhaps some interesting stories you've had from that time.
Okay, there's a couple. So I guess for anyone that's interested in getting into VC, there's obviously all the books you can read and learning the fundamentals of understanding growth rates, and customer acquisition costs, and all of that. But it's a much more human game than you think. I think many of us overcomplicate it, and your job, at least early stage investing, is to find the most exceptional people that you've ever met and give them as much money as they'll take from you. It's almost that simple. Anytime I would try and overcomplicate it, or the team would try and overcomplicate it, and of course there's due diligence you have to do after, and things come out that stop you from deals, of course. But like from getting from a maybe to like, okay, we should spend time on this. It's the people, and the best investments I've made to date that I personally led are one owner and two a company called Writer. Both unicorn plus companies, and I could tell in 7.5 minutes that Adam, the CEO of Owner, and May, the CEO of Writer, are exceptional people. And these people deserve the money and resources more than anyone else because these people are going to bring their vision to light. And I mean, yeah, I remember talking to Adam at Owner, and it was a super, super everyone wanted in this round. That's the other thing people don't understand about VC is it's not like you're just looking for founders and then you give them money. Like the best founders have 600 people that want to give them money. And we got to the round late. I was like new, unproven, young person, and Adam's sort of grilling me. He's like, "No, it's done. The round's closed." And I'm like, "Oh man, we got to get in." Um, and he liked our value prop. I was like, "Listen, man, like I will go to work for you. I will, open up my whole network. Like, let's do it. And I remember him looking at me and being like, man, I got to go back to the board and do this. So if I do this, like, you better come through. I was like, all right, man, let's do it. And like, true to form, he's like texting me like 5 minutes after we got it done. He's like, I need a bunch of CRO advisors. I need this, I need that. And I'm like, all right, let's do this, man. And ended up introducing him to Kyle Norton, who became an advisor. And now he's the CRO. And yeah, he's just such an incredible operator, and feel blessed to be a small, part in that story, and see you guys continue to
That's
crush.
such a cool story. I've never heard that one. And I'm curious, like going back to like when you started GTM Fund with your co-founder, like obviously there was something you saw. Like VCs typically maybe didn't specialize in go-to-market strategic help, or there wasn't a fund out there where all the LPs are CROs. And I'm curious, like, what made you feel like this was a validated idea that had something, and how did you kind of, start this thing?
Yeah. So I'll give flowers where flowers are due. Kudos large part to my partner Max Alchiller. He's been thinking about this for many many years, and I remember him bringing it up like, I don't know, 5 years before it ever happened. And yeah, I guess a couple of things happened simultaneously. Like, one, I started managing a lot of outreaches, like VC relationships, in terms of trying to unlock value from them. All of these big firms will come in and they'll sell you on all these promises, like, all right, let us invest X and we're going to do blah, blah, blah. But it's really, really hard to actually extract that value. They're busy, they got a lot, they're pretty focused on like new opportunities. So getting that value is tough. And I tried to do it. It can be like a full-time role, just being like, hey, dude, you said you were going to do this. This didn't happen. Can you do this? And chasing things down. I was like, that's crazy. Because I looked at all like my operator friends, CROs and CMOs I knew, and if I text them for something, they're like doing it in 13 seconds. So there was sort of this disconnect. And then at the same time, the community that Max built, and I joined, partway through the journey of Sales Hacker, had 130,000, members at its peak, and a lot of those people from those days started in the community as like managers, account executives, but now they were like running revenue at Square and Carta and like all of these huge companies. They had grown up, and now they were pretty badass humans, and they were all close friends, that we texted with. And it's like, okay, could we get those operators together and basically just package a better product that's out there in VC that actually meets the promises that it gives you? And then on the flip side, operators who are, CRO of Square, you've got a lot of your eggs in one basket. And, if you spent any time investing, that's a really risky portfolio to have 100% of your upside in one company. And we saw a lot of our friends just pick the wrong company. And let's say someone chose Salesforce in 2015, or they chose Achievers. Well, one walked away with 10 million in their equity, and one walked with zero. And so it allowed them to diversify their personal exposure as well into tech as a whole.
Yeah, and it's a genius idea. I mean, you accomplished an amazing feat that like so many people aspire to do in their careers. Like you raised over 70 million for GTM funds. And I'm just kind of curious, like I know you did a ton of mental performance coaching during this experience. You really like manifested this into existence. I know there's like so much trouble that came from this experience too. Like it was so hard. It drove you to the brink probably of insanity. But like tell us the story of like how difficult this was and the journey.
Yeah, it was tough, man. It was tough. I don't regret any of it. It brought me here. Yeah, I think the lessons we go through are really, really important. And I think yeah, I guess I'll just share it. I don't know how much I talk about it, but um, like many, you get to a certain part and you've sacrificed just too much, and so along those uh, last few years, went through a pretty bad separation. Not a bad in terms of, but just it was tough. Um, and to my fiance of 7 years, and there was other things at play, but largely that was because we were both just so focused on our own careers. She was an entrepreneur as well, and yeah, it just led to a lot of bad habits. I felt like I could not balance everything, and that's one of the problems with always going for more. You can't just keep adding indefinitely. That's you can't. But I kind of, for some reason, thought I could. If you addition without some sort of subtraction is just going to lead to burnout. And I would tell anyone listening to this, and because I don't think you hear a lot of um, people talking about it, but um, addiction is super rampant in those successful people, and that's something you have to worry about if you're wired a certain way. Oftentimes, that same thing that allows you to focus so much on a goal and like make this stuff happen has some negative side effects as well. And whether that is abusing, prescription drugs. A lot of people think, Adderall is like whatever. It's a powerful drug that's changing your brain chemistry. And, sleeping pills and alcohol, all of these things, just be really careful with them, because they're they might provide you a little bit of relief in the moment, but you gotta pay the price at some point. So yeah, and I'll
Yeah.
say, it's if anyone on this is like struggling or feels like they're struggling, or even this is like, ooh, this kind of hits close to home, like figure it out. Ask some people in your community, ask for help. I'm 9 months sober from everything, and it feels fucking incredible. And there's so much lies that comes with these things of like, oh, I need this to focus, or I need this to be creative, or I need this to cope. No, it's bullshit. You have your natural state is the best at coping. It's the most creative, and you'll have the most focus. The only reason you need those things is because you're not sleeping, you're not taking care of yourself. Yada.
I think that's a great message to our audience, and particularly for the fact of like in our generation, I feel like there's so much content and focus on like the hustle and you know what I mean, by all means sacrifice everything now, right? And like you never hear the other side of it, of like, okay, but what about when you get there, or what are the paths that a lot of people take to get there, right? So I think that's a very valuable piece of advice that probably a lot of people our age like don't hear enough, or maybe they don't want to hear it, but it's the truth. So I think we appreciate for telling your truth on that.
And
I'm trying to
I'll
think
hammer that
what
home
yeah.
with a story. So whatever goal you're chasing right now, you're thinking, all right, I got to just graduate, so I'll sacrifice X, Y, Z, and or I got to get this promotion, I got to do this thing, whatever. However you feel right now, and if you're anxious, tired, depressed, whatever it is, because you're sacrificing everything to get to that goal. When you hit that goal, after 10 hours, 12 hours of hitting that goal, you're going to feel that exact same way. And so, for me, I was under this illusion that, the 18 months that we were raising the fund, I would literally tell people in my life, like, basically, I'll be back. I'll be a normal person again once we close this fund. Like, I'm basically pretend I don't exist, and I'm going to somehow magically going to be able to snap my fingers and Scott will be back and I'll be happy and I'll be good. But right now I am stressed, anxious, fearful, having panic attacks, but it's okay because once I hit this goal, it's all going to be good. The day after I hit the goal, I felt anxious, stressed, all of that stuff. So it doesn't it doesn't change. And then, it's not a switch. It's taken me months to get my nervous system back to just like a normal baseline. Um, because you can't just, and whether you're using prescription pills or you're drinking or you're not sleeping, whatever it is, or you're just pushing yourself too hard. Our bodies have limits, uh, and I do think there's not enough of that narrative. And work hard, go after things, but you should never ever sacrifice your mental or physical health. That should come first, always.
For sure. And for people who are our age, who are maybe really ambitious, whether it's in their career, maybe they're trying to build something, maybe they're just trying to learn and they're very obsessive about that given thing. What's something that we can do now? Like if you were to go back, you say you have no regrets. And I think that's actually very important because like you want to always, be happy with what you've done ideally and, live in the present and continue to grow. Um, but what advice would you give people who are our age to um, kind of prevent these things so you can be cognizant of like, okay, Scott's saying this, I might be this type of person, I might have this type of personality, and that's okay. But here's how I can kind of course correct earlier on so I can get the success that, I want to have and achieve my goals, but at the same time do so in a way that's sustainable where, hopefully I won't sacrifice personal relationships or my health, my body, my mind. How would you go about it if you were, 22 again?
Yeah, reflected on this a lot. You got to figure out self love. And what I mean by that, you have to, through all the noise, understand that you are the only one who's truly looking after you. And you have to show yourself a tremendous amount of love. Don't be so hard on yourself. I was very critical on myself, and that's what perpetuated a lot of these behaviors. And how you actually show yourself, self love is by making the practices that you have in your life that fill you up, that make you happy, that make you feel complete, you make those non negotiable. All of these other things that you want to accomplish come after your meditation, your working out, all of those things. And if you don't have like a meditation practice, a silence practice, writing these things, I would highly, highly suggest that. You need to find a way to quiet the noise. We live in such a noisy, distracted world. Get off your phone, leave it for days at a time. Like the world's not going to end. And what I'm learning now, and I think I had some of this in my early career, is like that is an edge. That is a huge superpower. So even if you're just looking at this as I want to be more productive, carving out the time, if you're spending 2 hours on your practices a day that fill up your cup and you're sacrificing 2 hours of work, it's just going to make the other parts of your day much more productive, successful, creative. Uh, and you have to find a way to unplug, detach from this absolute chaos that it's going to get crazier. And yeah, that's what I would say. Like you have to put your daily practices first. Those are non-negotiable. And then you'll see the world clearly, you'll make better decisions, and you will still hit that goal, but you won't be a shell of a human by the time you get there.
Great advice.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it's definitely worth sharing that you started a new podcast. It's called The Wake Up Call, and our audience right after this should go over and check that out. And you started this while you're on your travels, and you're interviewing, the world's most successful founders and people. You're uncovering their stories of, of battling through adversity and ultimately like the reinvention of self and all the things you've basically talked about to us today. And I'm curious, like, what's been the most impactful thing to come out of this? Has it been like, is there any particular story that's been shared on the podcast or anything you can kind of tell our audience here about that experience?
I think I sort of started it as therapy for myself that I didn't have to pay for. Interviewing people that have gone through, similar things. And I think one of the crazy things is how similar we all are. And, when you're so myopically focused on success or goal, or, you're wrapped up in win by any means, it feels very like lonely. And you don't think that everyone around you might be going through the same thing, and you go to these networking dinners and everyone's like, yeah, family's great. We crushed this quarter. And like, it's all kind of bullshit. Particularly if you're playing really hard games, they're stressful and they take a toll. And I think, how similar many people's story is that go after that big life, that chase that big thing, that start that second, third, fourth company. Um, and, they all kind of hit this point of, why am I doing all of this? What actually matters to me? And they just start asking these questions that maybe we ask ourselves, but we don't actually really internalize. Like it's a box ticking exercise, and because you're like, oh, well, I got to make money and I got to build this career, but like, actually ask those questions like now, before you hit that point, and you can build an entire life that feels like a playground where you're just following interests you have, and you'll be able to accomplish incredible things. But just ask yourself some of the bigger questions, like, what does it mean to be a human being? Why am I here? How would I like to spend the very short, maybe 80 to 100 years that I have here? And, I was just in an ashram in India learning some really, ancient Himalayan wisdom that's been passed down like 5,000 generation or 5,000 years, 68 generations. And, they talk, whether you believe this or not, it's a good thought experiment. And they believe that you either reincarnate kind of up or down based on the very last thoughts you had before you die. And so the whole reason for life is to live a life that when you're just about to die, the thoughts you have are, hell yeah, what a beautiful ride. That was incredible. I helped so many people. I did it the way I wanted to do it. And not the regrets, not the fearful. Why did I spend my life chasing this bullshit that I didn't even care about? And, why did I try and impress all those other people that I didn't even talk to for 30 years after I did the thing? Like, if you think of life that way, where you're just setting yourself up to die with beautiful thoughts at the end, I think it's a pretty good way to live your life.
Oh, I think that's how we should end the episode, James. I think that's amazing.
That's a pretty good way to end it. I saw that you spent like, you know, 6 of these days while in the ashram in India, like in complete silence. And to me, that would be like a form of torture. But what motivated you to take on something like that, and like what was the experience like? Because I'm so curious.
Yeah, I think a lot of people feel the way you do, and I certainly did, and I think that's insane. What that is saying is like, we cannot be still with our own minds. Our own minds are beautiful. Again, talk about a playground. You can just like think creatively, do all these things, but we have so many imprints from the outer world that a lot of our thoughts are not even ours, and they're so scattered. This thing we see on social media, this advertisement we see down the road, or what our colleagues talking to us about, and you quickly realize when you go into silence. And I was also meditating like 8 to 10 hours a day when I was in silence. And it's also no eye contact, because that's a form of communication, and no reading, no books, obviously no technology. So like nothing. Basically, you're trying to get zero imprints, and you just want to figure out like, how does your mind, when it's not being stimulated by other things, how does that work? And the first few days you're kind of losing your mind, and your mind is searching for distraction. What are we doing? We need to be doing something. You feel like you're missing something. Man, by like day 4, maybe 3.5, talk about like remembering, I remembered the way my brain used to work as like a kid, without all this stimulation, and like what it's like to be bored. Boredom is beautiful. Boredom is incredibly creative. And I had this moment where I was like, this, and sometimes you're thinking, and sometimes you're supposed to sort of not think. At this point, I had this idea that I wanted to think about. And I remember like getting so happy that I was like laughing on my way to this park bench because I was so excited to sit down and just think this thought through, because it was like an exciting thought to think about. Um, and your attention span grows. And so I was able to think a thought through like to a conclusion. And, I think in our modern distracted world, we have a million thoughts and they just keep looping again and again because we never actually think them through to a conclusion. So they just keep popping up again and again. So yeah, I wrote a bit about it in my newsletter, and I call it the lost technology is silence. It feels like we're so quick to ask ChatGPT or Google something, but you sit in silence for a few days, and those questions you have, you either figure out they were the wrong questions, or you will get answers to them yourself, uh, which is pretty cool. And I would encourage everyone to try it, even one day during the weekend, Sunday, and it's also not just about being silent. It's about not having the intention to speak and removing all of the things. So yeah, give it a shot. I know personally, I'm going to try and do a day of silence every week. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Scott. I know we're over time here, so we'll wrap it up, but thanks so much for joining us. And this is such a cool conversation because we typically have people on the show who encourage people to do anything it takes to, achieve that startup success or whatever it be. And we never actually get to look at it from the outside and see, what are the negative repercussions of pushing yourself to the limits and, being conscious of all this stuff. So it's so cool we were able to talk about this with you today.
Thanks, guys. I enjoyed that. And yeah, last thing I'll say, like, I don't want people to leave this saying ambition's bad. Work hard, go after your goals. Just really watch what your fuel is. I was fueled by fear, for most of my life, fear of not being enough, not being good enough, fear of how others would perceive me, and fear of not being safe and not being able to take care of all these people that I love in this life. And if that is your fuel, that's unsustainable fuel, and that will poison you. So you have to find ways to turn your fuel into love, passion, whatever you're going to call it. If you do that, you'll be unstoppable and you won't have this burnout. You can go forever if that's your fuel.